Now turning next to the value system. This is another important aspect of China today. In spite of all of the revolutionary activities by the communists to purge the people of a lot of what were referred to as feudal, F-E-U-D-A-L, feudal belief systems and values, these are still extremely potent, extremely central to the way the Chinese view each other and the way that they view the world today. So the Chinese value system is largely based on Confucianism. Confucianism, the works of the ideas of Confucius, the 6th century BC philosopher, Confucianism is not a religion. It's a theory of social order. It's a series of principles of social order. Confucius lived in a time of great chaos, and he would go from kingdom to kingdom. This was before China was unified. Kingdom to kingdom, offering his services to help the local emperor, the local king, establish social order among his rebellious population. There are Confucian temples in China where people go to pay obeisance to Confucius, but they are not temples, they're not religious like Buddhist temples, Taoist temples, mosques, churches, and other kinds of temples. So one of the key ideas in Confucianism, and it's very sociological, is that society comprises a number of social, in sociology we say statuses, positions in society. And to every status there's attached a role. There's a performative aspect. If I am a professor, here's how I am supposed to perform my role as professor. If you're a teacher, how you're supposed to do it. If you're a business person, what you're supposed to do. If you're a father, and so on and so forth. The idea is that if everybody is well educated as to the role requirements and performs their role correctly, then society will be peaceful. That there's a division of labor in society. And if everyone performs their role perfectly, then society will be harmonious and you will not have strife. So among these roles, there's also a hierarchy based primarily on age and gender. And critical to this, at the root of this, is the so-called 5 basic relations, or the 5 pillars. These are between father and son, husband and wife, older brother, younger brother, friend, and emperor and minister. So of these 5, 4 are hierarchical. 4 are hierarchical. And the one that involves is a gender relationship, husband and wife, is also hierarchical. That China, highly gender stratified, paternalistic society, traditionally and to this day. Friend is the only egalitarian relationship. Interestingly, you've got these rather intimate relationships here, and then suddenly you jump to emperor-minister. This is because traditionally it was believed that the emperor is like the father to the nation. That China, you have the family is the root of Chinese society, the base of Chinese society, and the emperor's relation with the minister is like the father's relation with his sons. So that if the emperor performs his role as father of the country, father of China, satisfactorily, you will have peace within China just as you would have peace within the household. Interestingly, in the last couple of weeks, Chinese government, which this originally revolutionary government, revised the law on the protection of the rights and interests of elderly people. Now, as a person who's recently qualified for Medicare, I think this is a great idea. But what it does is enshrine filial piety. It's a law now that you must take care of your elderly parents. Again, I think this is just a terrific idea. So one of the things that Mao did was to urge young people to question authority, to challenge old people, to not accept what old people tell you. Now you have his successor government having it legally written into the legal code that young people must take care of their parents. Of course, parents are also legally required to take care of their children, but that only lasts so long. Another important aspect of Chinese tradition, Chinese value system, which is still, I think, very important in the minds of many Chinese today, is that they saw China as stratified into 4, now we would use the term classes, we may say social groups. At the top are the scholar officials. These are people who receive an education in the Chinese classics then they take a series of civil service exams, moving from the local level up to becoming officials who would be sent all over China as local officials, and then try to move their way up through the government and come back to the capital. So we talk about the importance of education in Chinese culture and Chinese civilization, but the goal of education traditionally and to this day has been to serve the state. Why do you become educated? You become educated to master the orthodoxy. Would have been Confucianism, now it's Marxism-Leninism. You master the orthodoxy so that you can get into the civil service and serve the state unquestioningly. So that the Chinese education system traditionally and now is based on mastery of orthodoxy, of a set of sacred texts. And this is critical for thinking, and this is one of the things the Chinese themselves are very concerned about, is that the Chinese education system stresses rote memorization. It does not stress innovation, originality, or creativity. People who think outside the box, who disagree, who ask questions, from time immemorial have been punished. Dissent is punishable. So I run a language program in Beijing at Tsinghua University, and through remote control. My office is in Berkeley, not in Beijing. But Tsinghua University celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2011, and I was invited to the anniversary celebrations. And they began in the Great Hall of the People, and Hu Jintao was the #1 man in China at that time. A lot of the leaders are all Tsinghua graduates. And both in the Great Hall of the People and then on campus, one speaker after another said, we must innovate. China must be innovative. We must innovate. We must think creatively. What does that tell you? It tells you that they don't. Why would they have to stress it unless it was something that was still a constraint on the education system and that the way that people are brought up? They're brought up to follow and to believe and to accept without questioning. So this is one of the main challenges that China faces, is this traditional idea about what education, what the purpose of education, and how people should be educated is. I've been at Berkeley for over 30 years, and I'm actually a little surprised at how well behaved my students. I'd expected to be more challenged more than I am. So had I been teaching when I was a student, it would have very different set of values. So anyway, the scholar officials at the top. Then below them, farmers. These are people who are considered honest. They work with their hands. They produce things. Next in line, artisans, what we would now call workers, people who work with their hands, producing. But China traditionally did not have a working class. This is small-scale workshops and family-based operations. At the bottom of the pecking order, at the bottom of the social stratification system in China have been merchants. Traditionally, the idea was that merchants are people who become rich through dishonesty, through deception, that they're not honest. You can't trust them. So one reason, there's a lot of literature on why China did not develop capitalism when it had a thriving merchant class. They had a great deal of trade, highly developed economy at certain periods in its history. Why did China not achieve a capitalist breakthrough the way that the West did? And one idea is that this class system was so deeply ingrained, so that what would a merchant may have wealth but did not have social standing, did not have social prestige. So when a merchant made money, what did he do? He used his money to either get an education or send his sons to become educated or buy an official office. It's, of course, an idea very strange to us that anyone would use money to buy themselves a position in the political system, in the civil service. But the idea was that a merchant was not a career that anybody really wanted to be known for. You used the wealth that you had accumulated in order to get into the legitimate system and become an official, or have your children become officials. So there is, Helen's going to talk later about business and so on in China today, but there is this still mindset about there's something not quite kosher about being a business person. Now, one of the ironies, of course, is that throughout Southeast Asia, as well as in the Bay Area and in Taiwan and in other places, The entrepreneurial class comprises Chinese. Virtually all of the entrepreneurs, the leading entrepreneurs in every country of Southeast Asia are Chinese emigres, which indicates that when the Chinese have this, again making a general stereotype, but they have this entrepreneurial skill, this entrepreneurial energy, but this value system in China has held them back. It's when they leave China that they can actually bring these talents into full play and become extraordinarily wealthy. So anywhere you go in Southeast Asia, there will be a Chinatown. And then spreading out beyond the Chinatowns, a lot of the entrepreneurial class is dominated by ethnic Chinese, some of whose families have been there now for hundreds of years. So within China, upward mobility, Chinese did not have a caste system. They've always had a fluid social mobility system. But mobility was through education. If you had money, you used it to get an education. You didn't, though occasionally there would be opportunities to use your money to buy positions. The importance of education as well as self-cultivation, constantly improving oneself, learning to be a better person, learning proper role behavior. And as I said before, by performing your role successfully, society will be orderly and harmonious. And so one of the key terms from Confucianism is this idea of social harmony. Social harmony, that if everyone works together, then society will be harmonious, have social order. So another key aspect of it is the middle way, is avoiding extremes and following the middle path. Now, we talk about Confucianism as being the main value system, but there's another main thread throughout the Chinese social order, Chinese value system, and that's legalism. If we think about Confucianism as being based on harmony, the middle way, everyone performing their task, and then society will be harmonious, legalism does not have such a sanguine view of human nature. Legalism is based on harsh laws and punishment, that people are essentially bad. They need to be disciplined. There needs to be a strong central authority to keep them in line. Dissent cannot be tolerated. So that if you visit the terracotta warriors near Xi'an, which was an ancient capital for many, many centuries, it celebrates Qin Shi Huang, the founder, the man who first unified China, who was the embodiment of legalism. His advisors were legalists, and they said, how do you achieve power? You suppress dissent. You use a strong hand. You have very harsh laws. You show people the consequences of acting up. And so this is also a very strong strain within Chinese political philosophy, Chinese social philosophy. So don't think only, when we talk about Chinese tradition, Confucianism, yes, that's part of it, ideally. But in practice, the iron fist has been much more important than actual social harmony. Traditionally in China, both from Confucianism and legalism, there's been an emphasis of the collective over individual rights. Individuals are not seen as isolated people in some sort of direct communication with God, or who are being judged as individuals by God, by an all-powerful God. Chinese see themselves as being part of networks, and that all their behavior is not judged by some absolute moral standard, but through the impact on their network. So it's a very, very different view of human nature and of the role of the individual. Values are not absolute, they're contextualized. And this is one reason that people who do business in China or who have other sorts of practice law in China have a lot of problems, is because they come at a lot of discussions and negotiations from very, very different perspectives and assumptions about human nature and the role of law and the idea of absolute standards that everybody is accountable towards. Now, these traditions, especially the legalist tradition, served the Communist Party very well, because Leninist organizational principles of hierarchy, collectivism, and intolerance of dissent jibe very well, especially with legalism in China. So there's always been a discussion of what is the impact of Leninism, Marxism, Leninism on Chinese political philosophy, Chinese politics, Chinese social order, and so on. And it's been, they fit very, very well together. It wasn't a large stretch, a big stretch to adopt Leninist ideas to, and interrelate them with legalist tradition in particular. Now, another important aspect of thinking about China, Chinese view of history, is the Chinese traditionally have a cyclical view of history. History does not move in a progression towards enlightenment or towards greater mastery of nature or of improved social life, but that it moves through cycles. Then a new dynasty establishes itself, consolidates power, often brutally. Then it achieves heights of power and civilization, but then inevitably there will be corruption, there will be incompetence, the dynasty declines, and then will be overthrown by a period of a combination of internal unrest and possibly external invasion. So the two of the major Chinese dynasties were actually dominated, created, and run by minority ethnic groups from the outside. The Mongols of the Yuan dynasty and the Manchus, the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty. So there's no sense of progress towards something new. An important concept in all of this is the mandate of heaven. Heaven is not personified in the sense of God. Heaven is an abstract force that grants legitimacy to the dynasty. How do we know a dynasty has been granted the mandate of heaven, has been granted legitimacy? Well, one thing is through natural phenomena. That's a very good sign, as well as social order. If the rains come on time, you don't have natural disasters, people aren't revolting, society is peaceful, that and you have heights of civilization and so on, that's a sign that you have received the mandate of heaven. On the other hand, if the dynasty is corrupt, begins to decline, you have natural disasters and popular unrest, that's a sign that heaven has withdrawn or is in the process of withdrawing its mandate. So the communists say, this is all superstition, we do not believe in the mandate of heaven, now we're a modern, a revolutionary, a political force, and we're creating a new China. No cyclical view of history, we're marching towards socialism and towards communism. But whenever there's a natural disaster, believe me, the Chinese people and leaders think, one of the first things that comes in their mind is, uh-oh, mandate of heaven. The communists are losing the mandate of heaven. So I think that's one reason why every time there's a natural disaster, and there's a lot of natural disasters, unfortunately, in China, the Chinese leaders go out of their way to demonstrate their efficacy at overcoming them, to allay any suggestion that this is a sign that they're losing the mandate of heaven. So whenever there's an earthquake, and unfortunately there's too many earthquakes in China, the leaders make a beeline to the site, and they send the army in to show that they're in charge. Don't worry, we got this thing under control. Another aspect, thinking about Chinese history, that is important for understanding China today is that there has been a cycle of unity and disunity. Not only do you have these dynastic cycles, but within the dynastic cycles you have firm control, and then you have China splitting apart into lots of autonomous kingdoms or local warlords, other kinds of localism. One of China's classic novels, historical novels that every Chinese knows, is called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And the first sentence of this novel is, those which have long been apart must unite. Typo there, sorry. Those which have long been united must fall apart. There's a belief that history moves through cycles not only of rise and fall, but of unity, disunity, unity, disunity. So the communists think that one of their main accomplishments has been to unite almost all of China, to bring together, to overcome warlordism and localism and the legacy of imperialism, to unite China. And they're determined to prevent separatism, for instance, in places such as Tibet, Xinjiang, and Taiwan. They see Taiwan as an unfinished business of imperialism because it was a Japanese colony for 50 years. And so that one of the things that drives the communists that is important for us to understand, especially when we talk about Tibet and Xinjiang, the part in the far west, is this obsession with unity. And that too often there has been, through internal unrest as well as foreign invasion, China has been split apart, pulled apart. And it's necessary to maintain a strong hand to prevent this from happening again. This is something that we Americans have a lot of trouble understanding. Now, moving finally into these questions of globalism, China's a global impact. Traditionally, the Chinese felt that China equaled civilization. China was not a country. China was civilization. They didn't have this concept of China as one country, one state among other countries. There was no one equal. There was nobody equal to China. Everyone else on their border was a barbarian, referred to as a barbarian. Foreign relations, foreign affairs was called barbarian management. They couldn't conceive of equal relations with these barbarians, and the barbarians would come periodically to wherever the capital was to give tribute, to demonstrate their loyalty, their fealty to the emperor, so that there was no sense that, oh, we're coming and we're exchanging ideas and goods and, and peace treaties and that sort of thing. No. It was basically these foreigners come, they kowtow to us, they bring us some of the things from their local economy, and we give them a blessing, and then they go home, and that's how it goes. Against this idea of China as equal to civilization, as superior to everybody else, you have the century of humiliation. Beginning in the 19th century, a new kind of barbarian came to China. These were red-haired, big-nosed, hairy, meat-eating, unclean barbarians who came by ship. I'm talking about the British, of course. And they, leading by the British, but then all the other imperialists, through especially beginning in the Opium War in 1839 to 1842, the first of a series of unequal treaties, which opened the door to imperialist domination, exploitation, and occupation. So beginning in the middle of the 19th century, China was seen as the sick man of Asia. People talked about slicing up the Chinese melon. China was not, other than a few places, China was never colonized. Instead, foreigners had spheres of influence. And Shanghai, of course, is the embodiment, the epitome of an area where the foreigners ran rampant, as they had their own legal system, their own police, their own military, their own economy. They were not subject to Chinese law. This was referred to as extraterritoriality. So the communists have been driven not only by this idea of unity, but also this idea of reversing the century of humiliation, of rejuvenating China, of helping China achieve its former greatness, and not only achieving its greatness, but redressing the wrongs that were done to it for over 100 years, beginning in the middle of the 19th century. So in the mind of the leaders of China, the reforms which began at the very end of 1978 have proven that China is capable of doing this. So in the last couple of months, the new leadership of China, the man named Xi Jinping, who has the three top positions, General Secretary of the party, Chairman of the Central Military Affairs Commission of the party, and President of the People's Republic of China, head of state, has talked about the Chinese dream. The Chinese dream. But the Chinese dream is not like an American dream. If I work hard as an individual, I can achieve success. It's a collective dream of we Chinese, by working collectively, pooling our energy and our talents, can once more achieve the greatness that was ours for so many centuries. There's a new book which just came out in the last couple of weeks. Some of you, I did a program at the World Affairs Council and the Asia Society last week, which is conveniently available on the web now, discussing with the authors, Orville Schell and John Delury, a new book called Wealth and Power, which for those of you who are interested in this topic is a really good study of this theme of wealth and power going through Chinese intellectual and political leaders for the course of the last 100 or so years. The Chinese leadership to this day is suspicious of America and of Japan in particular, that we and the Japanese have never given up our goals, our dreams of dominating China and preventing China's rise. Again, this is something that is hard for us to understand. We may not feel, oh, we're trying to prevent, we don't want China to achieve greatness, we don't want China to become a world power, but the Chinese don't see it that way. They take this long historical view, especially towards the Japanese, that you have never given up your desire of conquering us and controlling our resources. So finally, I think it's important to recognize how this dream of wealth and power drives much of what happens in China today. China is not a communist country. I saw some of the study questions in your folder. China is not a communist country if by that you mean it has achieved a socialist or a communist form of economy, society, and political system. It's communist only in the sense that it is dominated by a party that calls itself the Communist Party. But instead of really, even though everybody studies Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, it's required civics education. It has very little purchase within Chinese society and among the Chinese leadership. Their emphasis is on control and on not losing power and on achieving the Chinese dream. They have substituted nationalism and consumerism for communism and Marxism as a belief system. And nationalism is tied up with this idea of the Chinese dream, of achieving greatness, of rejuvenation. If you go to Beijing, one of the things you should do is to go to the National Museum right in Tiananmen Square. There's an exhibit called The Road to Rejuvenation, where there's a lot of stuff about the century of humiliation and how the Communist Party has led China to now achieve rejuvenation and once again its greatness. So much of what we see and hear from China derives from its long history. It provides values and guides for behavior, but also constraints on China achieving, actually achieving its full potential. So thank you very much for your attention. I'd be very happy to take any of your questions and comments now. Thank you.